Psychoanalysis Shades of Silence. Namaste. Psychoanalysis usually interprets words, behavior, feelings. Seldom we focus on silence. Journey today is into the heart of silence with Dr. Himanshu Vaidyaji. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, how do we enter into silence?
Psychoanalysis, by definition, is called a talking cure. And so, very few therapists are actually comfortable with silences. Usually, if the silences are long enough, the therapist makes an intervention and breaks that silence. Few therapists would appreciate the naturalness of silence, the healing potential of silence, and be able to separate the pathological silences. So we can look at silences in the context of psychoanalysis in three ways. There are normal silences, that a normal person between two activities is in the silence. Somebody has just woken up, doesn't want to speak anything for half an hour or 1 hour. It's a very natural silence. So there are natural silences. Then there are pathological silences. And there are healing silences. So we look at abnormal, normal, and supernormal, all three shades of silences. Now, very few people actually know about it, and so most therapists become uncomfortable when they encounter long silences in the therapy session. If we go into, say, pathological silences, then there are shades of pathological silences. So one can roll out the entire canvas of pathological silences and see the whole panorama of silences. There is a separate silence of the catatonic type, where there is a huge amount of bottled up anger and very high ego strength to really control it into a kind of a frozen silence. That's a very different kind of a silence, a catatonic silence. And then you have the silence of the depressed. It's a very different kind of a silence. And the silence of the depressed can go in various flavors. There can be silence of anger when somebody is depressed because of bottled up anger. There can be silence of sadness if one is depressed because of sadness. There can be silence of guilt, silence of hopelessness, and silence of shame. And all these silences you find in the depressed patients. And these silences are very different than silence of catatonic type. And then we look at the silence of the anxious. Somebody is so anxious, he goes numb and he goes into silence. Somebody goes into the viva and he gets so nervous, he just can't speak anything. So that's a very different kind of a silence of anxiety. Then you have silence at home. Many people have this, that with their friends, they are very gregarious, very cheerful, and at home, they are very serious, very silent. So the silence at home is actually a pathological silence. They are holding back very tightly themselves, when in fact themselves, really speaking, they are very gregarious and cheerful and social. But at home, they go silent. Because there are traumatic events at home, traumatic people, trauma-giving people at home. And often you see the face of such people in presence of their family members, and you can see the anger flashing over or moving from one side to the other over the face. So this is a silence at home when the same person is not equally silent outside with his friends. Then you have silence at work, where the organization is very oppressive. The hierarchy is very oppressive. Colleagues are attacking. There is too much of anxiety. too much dependence on the job to run one's family, or there is some unconscious, unresolved problem which projects out and creates a difficulty. It may be Oedipal unresolved, or it may be the split unresolved, or it may just be low cohesion and easy disintegration of the ego in the face of challenge of work, or just a simple catastrophic thinking. So that leads to a very different kind of withdrawal and silence at work. And the same person, the moment the recess happens and you go out for lunch, the same person is gregarious and cheerful. And the moment the recess ends, again the same person goes into that state. And when the day ends and he goes back in the bus or whatever vehicle he is, again he is gregarious. And he becomes again angry, irritable, and sad the moment he has to go back tomorrow again to work. And then you have that phrase, thank God it's Friday. So that's a very different kind of a silence at work. Then there are healing silences of meditation, silences of substance abuse, silences that you enter into after undergoing some sort of energy healing, be it Reiki or pranic healing. And then you have the silence in therapy, which is a category by itself. That's a very different category of silences.
Right.
So how to deal with silence in therapy is a subject by itself. And we have one discussion on our channel on in the technique series, right, where we go into different silences, and in that one encounters in therapy. So
That is only, this has been discussed only in the field of psychoanalysis or other kind of therapies also.
more in psychoanalysis, less in other fields. In other fields, they have uh, taken that to be a sign of depression or a sign of disinterest or a sign of withdrawal and self-defense. But they have not gone into the areas of silence or like beyond it. For example, silence related to containment,
Mm.
silence leading to the ineffable O, uh, silence of internalization. Those silences they have not gone into. So the full uh, canvas of silence in therapy is usually addressed in psychoanalysis.
Even in person-centric approach, if we see psychodrama, they give a lot of containerhood to the silence. There's a lot of containment done. But that's with purely with the Rogerian concept of positive regard and holding,
Yeah,
not the way psychoanalysis talks about it.
correct. Because we will look at the hydraulic approach to healing and the non-hydraulic approach to healing, and what does silence mean in the context of either. And that's a very different approach, and it leads to very different ideas and concepts than just giving a holding in the unconditional positive regard sense.
So, jumping ahead, can we go into the silence in therapy?
Uh, in therapy, one encounters an entire panorama of silences which are unique to the therapy situation. There can be a regular silence in therapy, like you are just catching breath, or you just want to recoup your energy, or you want to think out something, or you want to find words to say something that has been asked. So that's a natural silence in therapy, which is not pathological at all, it's human. And then we have the silence of relaxation. Often, after a particular length of therapy, you start feeling very safe in the therapy room and on the couch. And that safety produces a particular kind of relaxation. And there can be a silence of that relaxation. That from feeling turmoil outside, one feels safe. And a lighter version of that relaxation, many people feel when they close their doors and they are alone, or they are in the bathroom or the washroom and the door is closed. That's where they finally feel safe. Safe from attacks or safe from observation of others.
Mm.
So people often spend far more time than normal in those closed spaces. So you have that silence of relaxation. Then you have silence of repression, where different affects are repressed. And each of these repression can lead to a different kind of a silence. And by projective identification or by countertransference, or by looking at the body language or the facial features, or what preceded it or what followed it, one can make sense out of what kind of affect has been repressed. So there can be a silence of repression of anger, silence of repression of sadness, silence of repression of guilt, of shame. There can be just too much anxiety and silence. So all these silences are affect related silences. And then there can be a silence of loss. There can be a silence where one is internalizing the silence and the peace of the therapy room. There is a silence, period of silence, where one is internalizing the therapist, of course, unconsciously. Or there can be long silences where one wants to assert oneself and be oneself unconditionally. And one checks out whether one is unconditionally accepted or not. And at the same time, difficult feelings may be activated inside of the person. In my own therapy, I had a few sessions where I did not say a single word for 45 minutes.
Oh,
I went in, laid down on the couch, got up, paid the money, went out. And often in retrospect, I have thought about those sessions and I never came to conclude that it was money wasted or time wasted. Something very valuable happened in that silence. So silence is not necessarily a waste. Silence can be an investment. So these are very different kind of silences. And then there can
I,
be
I,
silence.
I would also like to bring forth here there are two experiences to this silence. Once being on the spot of that of a client. For myself, there was this session taken by my mentor, and 20 minutes I was silent. And when we ended, I felt nice that though there were a lot of difficult things coming up, but there was a space for them to exist without words, which created a kind of own healing space within.
So it tells you that there is no demand on you to mandatorily speak. You are free to be as you wish. And that safety and that freedom is very valuable. There is no insistence, there is no demand that you ought to speak.
And
So
the other experience was to do with there was a client where I was the therapist, and um, he walked in, he requested that what if I don't speak? He himself said, what if I don't speak? Can I just sit? And he sat, and towards the end, he kept on looking at me so that I should question something. And that was the tricky point where I asked him to free associate the silence.
right.
And then came the projective identification, which he internalized as a child of that of his angry father. So that was a session which gave us a jump of 3 to 4 sessions together
Hmm,
with silence.
correct. So there is a whole world of silence. It's like one person may take the route with the patient that if you don't allow me into your inner world, you have all the rights to do so. I have no right to get into your inner world without your permission. But then how will we work forward? This can be approach of one person. The second person can take an approach and say, it is your 1 hour. I have no right to tell you what to do with it. You are free completely to do as you wish. I will go along with you, whatever you do. That's completely a different approach.
Will it be similar to people coming in sleeping? Just asking, can I close my eyes? And actually, they're silent and then they sleep. Because I have taken 4 or 5 sessions where people entered, they sat down, they remained silent, and then they slept off. And then they were happy that they felt integrated and nice and rejuvenated. Is it same as a part, certain cases? Will it be this only silence?
Yeah, so we have to be slightly careful here with the specific practical situation of the person.
Right.
Often it happens that the person is working across the day and the session is at 7 o'clock, so anyway he's tired.
No, it was not owing to the tiredness. It was the silence which lulled them to that state of trance kind of a sleep. It wasn't like
Correct,
a sleep.
correct. So it is a silence of relaxation. So there is a silence of relaxation, there is a silence of safety, and there is also the silence of avoidance. So when the silence becomes pathological or resistance, and when it is at the service of healing, is very situational. And after looking at so many silences, we develop a knack of it. That how do we deal with silences? Is this silence that we are encountering right now normal? Is it pathological? Or is it at the service of healing? Because silence operates in all the three categories. Then we have the silence, which is a silence against emotional closeness.
Hmm.
Can often come up in therapy. There can be silence because erotic closeness is developing. There can be silence because something extremely shameful is coming up. There can be silence because very difficult aggressive material is getting transferred onto the therapist. And one is confused about what is happening. And often, if it gets uninterpreted and uncontained, and if the person himself does not have a positivity and containing capacity, often that can end therapy out of the concern of the patient not to harm the therapist. And
So
then we have,
there is an awkward silence, there is a needed silence, there is a healing silence, there is a
correct,
silent silence. Right.
and then there is interpretation of silence. What do we do as therapists? So, one situation is we interpret the silence. It can happen both in pathological situations as well as in healing situations, that we allow it to go on for some time, and when we find the time appropriate, we make an intervention. So, one is how do you deal with silences? One is interpretation. Second is holding, that we hold the silence and allow it to be. In fact, the patient is waiting for an intervention and we don't make an intervention. He looks often it looks like this. Now something is going to happen. Now something is going to happen. We don't do it. We just allow him to be deeper and deeper into that silence. And at times we are looking at a silence which leads to ineffable O, what Beyond calls the ineffable O. So these are our traditional responses to silence, but very few people actually know it. So they don't know how to handle silence, just as very few people know how to handle transference or projective identification. So this is like a technique element of therapy, that if one does not know, have the knowledge or the skill related to silence, then just as people don't handle well transference or projective identification, they don't handle well silence. But if you know it, if you practice it, after some time, you manage the silence is very productive.
So
In fact,
silence.
uh,
Mhm.
sorry, just one statement.
Yes, sir, please.
I'm reminded of the journey of silence,
Hmm.
psychoanalysis. Initially, it was looked upon largely as a resistance,
True.
that silence in the method of a talking cure, what can it be but resistance? Later on, as we understood more and we went deeper, we realized the nuances and the whole universe of silences. It's similar to Freud's journey related to transference.
Mm-hmm.
Freud started with a phrase called uh, transference resistance,
Mm.
meaning transference itself is a resistance. And then he started appreciating the value of transference, and he ended up with resistance to transference. So initially he thought transference was resistance, and later on he thought if transference does not happen, that is a measure of resistance. So from transference resistance to resistance to transference was the whole journey of Freud, how he looked at transference. Initially as a resistance, and then as something very valuable, which if it did not happen, that itself was a sign of huge resistance. Silence in its journey in psychoanalysis had a similar kind of journey, from being looked upon as a resistance to being looked upon as something very valuable, very healing, and something very multichromatic.
Mm. So, talking from silence of the couch, silence of the therapy space, coming to silence at home, isn't it a very important silence to articulate? There are many people who are very silent at home, and as you mentioned in the opening of the session itself, that there is a contrary personality hiding in them as if. What is that about?
The key is the man the same at home and outside home? And the second is, does the man want to be that? Now, if either of this question is into a no, then we go deeper into it, because then it doesn't look like a normal, silent, healthy flow of personality. And we look at people who are silent at home, and we find there is a story there,
Mm.
that they are not recluse by personality. It's a defensive action. There are too many attackers, too many people who do overt attack or a covert attack. And therefore, the person has learned not to speak at home. And that actually is a very defensive action. And the person actually is holding himself back very tightly. He's not at ease. He's holding himself back very tightly. And that will tire out the person. So the person will need to go out of home for some hours to really freshen up and be himself at least for a few hours. That is very important. The person also learns that he has to shout to be heard. So even when the person speaks occasionally, the speaking is not sweet or calibrated. It is usually like an assault, because he knows that this is the only way he can be heard, and this is the only way he can safeguard his desires and his beliefs. Otherwise, they will all be assaulted. They will be dismissed, assaulted, something will be done. And there is always a fear of being laughed at, of being mocked, of being dismissed, of being asking somebody to suppress his real self and put up the self that is more acceptable to the family. And
It's like a
all
coping strategy.
the coping strategy, but a very heavy cost coping strategy,
Mhm.
right? And therefore, what it leads to is severe repression. And often after a long time, somatization happens, because you cannot go on for long like this. And this is unfortunately the situation of many people in India, and I suppose
Yes.
across the world.
I have seen people having this thyroid dysfunction, strangely to do with the somatization of the need to speak up for themselves
Correct.
and remain choosing to remain silent.
Um, of all my friends that I have in India, there are very few who are the same at home and outside of home. Most of them have, to some degree, what we are talking about, this holding back, this self repression, the fear of being dismissed, of being mocked, of being attacked by the family members themselves. So, in one sense, the whole of India needs a course in nonviolent communication. And this is therefore is very common. And this is a very different kind of a silence we are referring to. A silence of anger, a silence of the fear of being mocked at, fear of being criticized, fear of being laughed at.
Also, that of those of authority figures in the house. If there are too many authority figures dominating, the it's usually seen the youngest or the most vulnerable one chooses to remain silent. And I had a classical case of hysteria, of aphonia was there, hysterical aphonia, uh, which was more to do with this suppression of the verbal
Right.
expression totally.
Correct. So we see most of us are not at home what we would like ourselves to be if we are set free. And therefore, this is a very different kind of silence. It is not a healthy silence, it's a pathological silence. And therefore, many children feel much better when they are in the hostel, that they are free. And the moment they have to get back after the hostel days back to the family, they find it very uneasy, very unsettling,
True.
because they have been themselves for 3 years, 4 years, and suddenly to not be themselves is not easy. So this is a very different kind of a silence that you find at home. It's a pathological silence, often not diagnosed as pathological, but it's definitely pathological. May not be pathological by DSM standards, definitely pathological by psychoanalytic standards.
So, coming to another important silent aspect, silence in social gatherings. There are many people who choose to remain in larger groups, they choose to remain silent. One on one, they're very easy to converse with. What is there?
Correct.
Is it to do with the social anxiety? Is there a psychoanalytic component there? What it
Correct.
is about?
Yeah. It's a it is a different kind of a silence in the social context, and often one finds this silence in a marriage celebration, say a reception, where you find many people holding a plate and standing all alone, right? Just wishing that the time gets over. They have just come to say hello, so the social formality is done, and then they will just pass some time in some uneasy way, and they'll be looking at the watch when to get out, and they'll be looking at others, given others are leaving, so they can join in and leave, and they'll be asking others, when are you leaving? So that is a very different form of silence, and that is huge component of social anxiety. And underlying that are many reasons. One, you can have that silence because the underlying theme may be, I am not good enough, I am an imposter, and all that I have put up in the front is the false front. Soon everyone will discover, they will mock at me and humiliate me, and I will be hurt, and then I will experience shame without any bounds, and then thereafter there will be nowhere to go, and life will be over forever thereafter. That kind of unconscious dialogue, that is one theme that leads to social silence. The second theme may just lead, may be something objective, that in reality you have a deficit in communication and you have been actually mocked because of really what you did. Third may have to do with socio-economic circumstances, that one may belong to a lower class and therefore one may feel inadequate in certain situations, especially of friends who once were together and now they have progressed and you have not. So this is a very different kind of a silent situation. Then you have a silence of narcissistic rage, that you are living with a fantasy of one's omnipotence and the social reality. The moment you touch it, that omnipotence breaks, because you know others are far ahead of you in many ways. Maybe the car in which they come, the clothes they wear, or the gifts they give. And this disturbs the narcissistic equilibrium. And this creates a narcissistic rage. And there are two ways in which one handles it. One, either there is a strong containment, repression of all the feelings which emerge, or one goes into what is called the defensive wounded hero effect. That only if X had not happened, I would have been a great man. One goes into those kind of fantasies at that point, the wounded hero situation. That daydream starts in the mind. Then there is this silence of the dependent, where the dependent idealizes the other, de-idealizes oneself, and then goes into a silence out of inferiority, out of shame, out of guilt, and so on. And what is needed there is a lot of cognitive work followed by psychoanalytic work, and it's essentially a question of understanding and practice to handle this particular types of silences, of not being able to be as articulate as you are individually in groups. And the irony is, the same people in some other group where they feel very safe, they are very articulate. So this silence and this social anxiety is very, very contextual to the specificity of the groups.
But how do we put across the concept of introvertness here? There are people who have this personality type and seeing worlds, half of the population being on the other side.
Correct.
What
So
is
there
happening there?
the criteria there will be that how are they outside of the group. So if there's a universal pattern of personality, then we don't see any problem, because within the social group and outside of it,
Hmm.
he's always an introvert, he's always withdrawn. He is in group A or group B, is always the same. Now that is an introversion. But
That is like
this,
a constitutional fact.
yeah, it's not a problem to be solved in one way. It's a uniqueness of the personality in one way to say it. But if you are silent in one particular type of group, one particular type of social occasion, and not silent in the other, right? Or you are very gregarious when alone or with one or two friends, and you suddenly change the moment the group comes of 10, then we have to look into the dynamics of the social situation. That what is happening deep inside, that the person is going silent when he is universally not silent. So that is where we, so to say, smell pathology.
So, isn't it a similar situation at workplace as well? Or there are some other dynamics?
Unfortunately, it is. Most workplaces are extremely hierarchical, extremely sadistic, and extremely disempowering of the individual. It is also true that what we call corporate work today or official work today, 8 to 5, 10 to 5, actually, when it started for the first time, and people started to come from the villages to work in the cities, and they were offered a 10 to 5 job, the initial description was it was a 10 to 5 slavery. Because before that, nobody was accustomed to a 10 to 5 job on the fields. They would go in the morning, do some work, come back, take rest, go again in the evening. When there was a plowing season or harvesting season, they would work hard. Otherwise, they would be resting, doing what they want. So, this 10 to 5, 5 days a week, and that too at the order of the superior, right? And that too doing work as we are given a method or an equipment. This is something which is very alien to the human race in an archetypal sense. It's a very modern construct and a very alienating construct and disempowering construct. So often you see, and most people don't do the work they like. There is an old saying that 75% people are in the wrong jobs, 75% are in the wrong marriages, and 75% are in wrong jobs and wrong marriages. Right? So this being the situation, very few people actually do what they like. They just do and it's something as a drudgery to keep the finances of the self and the family rolling. If you put $1 million in their account, they won't do a day of work because they really don't like what they're doing. Many also don't know what they want to do. It's not easy thing to know what you want to do. Very few people have a natural outburst of their liking. Most people have to dig inside deeper for years to find out what they really like. So it is true that the organizational situation uh, produces lot of repression, lot of rage, lot of transparencies, projective identifications, a severe repression, severe domination. It's a dehumanizing environment actually. And this whole idea, which has gained currency in the modern times, that if you don't fit in the corporate world, something is wrong with you.
Hmm.
In fact, this idea is wrong, and there's something wrong with the idea itself. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying only a minority of population can actually fit into the corporate structure.
True.
It is an exception that fits not the rule. To make the exception into a rule is a complete mistake. It's a grave error. So it is only a few people like Sri Aurobindo and Osho who experimented with a different kind of living, both a different kind of family environment and a different kind of occupational environment, where they experimented with things where these things could be overcome and people can happily live according to their will and be more creative and more free. So when we come to that collective living, organizational, I mean, collective living in the sense of work and collective living in the sense of relationships. Uh, in social experimentation area, it is in the last century, it's only Osho and Sri Aurobindo who actually experimented on a scale of a different kind of living in terms of work and personal relationships. Apart from that, we have not really experimented, and culture has not really uh, gone deeper into this aspect. So you are right, there are silences, and these are very sad silences. These are silences of tragedy, both at work and at home. And these silences of tragedy, they affect a large section of the population. So if we talk of quality of life of a large section on a scale, this is a very important point to be gone into and to be managed, and to the extent we can save those that we can.
That also reminds me of silence of a narcissist with a sadistic rage. The cold treatment they put through, that is again traumatizing for the others, and it's largely been seen in office spaces and personal spaces at homes.
Correct.
Then there are
So,
different silences of tragedy and trauma where people are helpless, silence of helplessness,
correct.
stuckness.
So it's a very important point you have raised, that there are overt attacks and there are covert attacks. Attacks of omission and attacks of commission.
Oh, sure.
Attacks of commission are overt attacks. Attacks of omission are covert attacks. Like somebody, a parent going silent and giving cold treatment and ignoring somebody and rejecting somebody is a cold attack. It's a covert attack. And that silence is an attacking silence, a very different kind of a silence. That silence actually is an attack. It's a silence of dismissal. It's a silence of shaming. It's a silence of communicating you are not good enough. It's a silence of criticism. It's a silence of despondency that you won't be able to do anything in your life. It's a silence of saying you are beyond repair. I am done with you. It's a waste of time to engage with you. So these silences are very attacking silences. And they are what I call the covert attacks. The attack of ignoring, the attack of dismissal, the attack of
Mm.
coldness, the attack of silence, the attack of speaking less, the attack of not saying when somebody in the natural situation is supposed to say something, right? Attack of not participating in your happiness when you are trying to share it. So these are very attacking silences from the other side. And in response to it, often the person who is the recipient develops that boiling rage controlled kind of silence. So one pathological silence breeds another pathological.
Mm. There's a response to silence.
Yeah.
Um, Also, we talked about when pathological silences, other than those of anxiety and all, even in negative signs of schizophrenia,
Ah,
there is a selective mutism and negative mutism kind of a term there.
correct.
So,
So that's a different kind of silence, and that has three different flavors. One is the silence of sad withdrawal. Second is the catatonic silence, where occasionally you see that burst of catatonic excitement. Right? Between silences, there is this catatonic excitement. And you see silence of happy regression. When you look at negative symptoms of schizophrenia, one of the situations is of a happy regression, where you regress back to primary narcissism. And you get into silence, but it's a happy silence. And similarly, there is a sad silence and there is a catatonic silence. All the three silences are silences of schizophrenia, but they are very different from each other and from other silences.
In fact, that reminds me in my early years of training during my internship, there was a case where this person was schizophrenic and he had not uttered a single word from last 13 years.
Oh, goodness.
And in the session, within 5 minutes, he started conversing, and everybody was shocked, the family members, because they were standing on behalf of explaining him to me. And I realized what you just said, that that was to do with, you just used the word that, that unconscious, it flips. Technically, the excitement which was suppressed that came up on the surface, seeing the positive and conducive environment, that of a therapy. He spoke, his family were really shocked, and I could see that how that the schizophrenia has not gone. It's just that mutism has gone. It was just in 5 minutes.
So this is like a chosen mutism. And what happened there was um, the phenomena on which we had a discussion once, an episode of recording.
Mm-mm.
Only you can heal me.
Hmm.
And somehow we found that person in you where only you can heal me was relevant. That the type of safe, good person he was looking for somehow had a large match with what you were. And therefore, only you can heal me came into action. And you can see the mutism going away, at least in interaction with you. It may have set in again afterwards, but at least with interaction, it goes away.
Right. So that brings us to a point where we can talk about these healing silences.
So these are the good
Different kinds.
silences. Yeah.
Yes.
This is the silence that you feel after meditation, silence after a good therapy session, silence of joy, silence after you have a Reiki or pranic healing session and uh, the system is cleaned of difficult prana. These are silences after exercise, uh, silences after good containment, silences at a good workplace. There are definitely a few good workplaces, less than 2%, but they are there. Silence in a safe social group, silence with a good friend, and uh, this good silence is often are healing silences, very, very healing silences.
Even silence of relieving sigh in a positive way,
Ah,
when a lot of effect has been, lifted upon.
correct, correct. So it is like after doing a hard work, you are in that silence of rest. So these are very good silences, very healing silences, deeply moving
Isn't
silences.
it kind of a homeostasis of the psyche, which silence you're referring in the positive form? That there is this uh, kind of a space where there is no need to feel or think much. It's a halt, it's a pause, it's a rejuvenating stop.
Correct. So this is actually slightly more than homeostasis. It's actually accretion of health.
Mm.
So it's more than balancing. It's actually health giving. And many of them are actually very enriching experiences. And many of them actually also relate to spiritual advancement or personality integration. So in that sense, some silences definitely are at the service of homeostasis, but many of them go far beyond homeostasis into enrichment, into self-knowing, and into very deep self-transformation. So those are very deeply working silences. And therefore, if you see, in all spiritual schools, silence has great importance. You will see in most spiritual schools, silence, flowers, and mantras, they, at least in the Hindu tradition, and I'm using the word Hindu in the large sense of the word, which includes Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, everything, all the Indic religions. So that's a very quintessential element of all spiritual schools. The Maun Vrat or the silence is very, very important. And of course, they use silence, like in Vipassana,
Mm.
they use silence not only for self exploration, but also for self purification, not only for healing, but also for enrichment, for progress, for development and transformation, very deep rooted transformation. Uh, there is a very old saying which says, education can be done in a group, but sadhana can be done only alone in silence. So, silence is very, very
Interesting.
important for deep inner work.
Other than the natural state of human being, the silences, do you think there's a cultural references which also tend to emphasize or change the perspective of silence? Like when we talk about spirituality, especially in India, a very knowledgeable, known, experienced person is mostly quiet,
Yeah,
or a very innocent, naive person is quiet, and the people are बहुत शांत हैं, बहुत कम बोलते हैं. They see it as a positive attribute, but whereas in many other societies, different cultures, it is not seen as the way we see.
correct. So, the question is correct. How does society look at silence? And does it?
Society, of course, that is one point, but when we look at the cultural aspect, at a given point of time, for example, in Dwapar, when we see Ram, he was always mentioned as a very silent person.
So, the framework here is different. The framework in the East is one of uh, the journey of the soul being across incarnations towards enlightenment. And the core idea there is the more you are able to transform yourself spiritually, the less desires and fears you have. And the less desires and fears you have, less are the thoughts and less are the words. So, in that way, the silence actually is a natural outcome of inner transformation. When there are too few desires and too few fears, there is less need to speak anything. And there is a causeless bliss which is flowing inside. More is the causeless bliss flowing inside, less is the tendency to interact with the outside world, and that includes speaking. So, this is a very different kind of a framework from the Western framework,
Hmm.
where silence is seen essentially as pathological or withdrawal.
Mm. Or even insulting and being arrogant.
Correct. So, that's a very big cultural difference that we look at that in a very different way. And therefore, even in the spiritual practice, much before one is enlightened, one is given a taste of that by asking him to be silent. And often in many schools, one of the final tests is to live alone in the cave, silent for 21 days. That often is the last examination.
So that is to do with the cultural aspect. But when we look at the whole social setup, the society, is silence not intruded upon by society?
It is. Human beings are very comfortable with thoughts. Nobody is comfortable with feelings. Similarly, we are very comfortable with talking. Nobody is comfortable with silence. So we have called psychoanalysis a talking cure, but actually it is a talking cure come silence cure. It's not only talking cure. Lot of things happen non-verbally in therapy. So the non-verbal part of healing actually is a silence cure. So it is not exclusively a talking cure, it's talking cure plus silence cure.
Hmm.
Just as it is not exclusively a hydraulic healing, it's a hydraulic healing plus non-hydraulic healing. And a lot of non-hydraulic healing happens in silence. It's essentially the hydraulic healing which happens in the verbal discourse. Or some clarification happens and there is ungeneration of affect. That also happens in the verbal discourse. But there is a distinct area of healing which is non-hydraulic, which happens in silence. Now, very few therapists and very few people are comfortable with it. So, what in society, what happens is when society encounters silence, they feel it very awkward. They feel either insulting or they feel they are not good enough to make the other feel at home. So they break the silence by chatter. And actually, they use words like, you are just not saying anything. So they are not comfortable with uh, silence. Society is yet to learn to respect silences and be capable of living it. I'm reminded of a very good statement on this point,
Mm-hmm.
which is there in Sherlock Holmes' story. Dr. Watson writes it.
Okay.
He and Sherlock Holmes have gone on a walk. I mean, had gone on a walk last evening, and today is writing the story. Dr. Watson is writing the story. So they walked for a long time together, as they did every evening, but nobody said anything on that walk. And Dr. Watson writes, we walk together in silence, as befits those who know each other intimately.
Uh-huh.
Because all the speaking has been done, all the understanding each other has been done, right? And the relationship has sailed through it into a different kind of maturity. And now there's no need to speak so much. There is so much of acceptance and so much of compatibility, so much of joy in being together, that you don't have to really speak out, and you can actually walk. And he says this very well. He says, we walk together in silence, as befits those who know each other intimately. So society I think society has a long way to go, and a long way to go for everyone.
Even such phrases like "खामोशी की भी जुबान होती है" that takes me to the aspect of poetry and art expression, where they have talked about a lot about this expression of silence. And while I always confirm myself by saying I'm very fluent in silence, I think our viewers are going to love this discussion. Interesting and delicious the conversation was for me. Hope you all liked it. See you all again. Namaste.
Namaskar.